welcome and thank you for joining us for our first ever virtual Yard Smart Garden Walk. My name is Larissa Armstrong and I am the Assistant Director at the Ecology Action Center. I just want to make a quick note to anyone who is registered through the Zoom meeting and to our Facebook viewers. Please do share any questions that you have for us throughout the event, and we will be able to answer those for you at the end with the help of me and our guest panelists, Sherrie Snyder from Illinois Prairie Wild Ones, Krista Kirkham from the Nature Conservancy, and Jeff Hindman, a horticulturalist with the City of Bloomington. We are really happy to have you all here today. Just to give you a little bit of background information about the Ecology Action Center for those of you who are new with us here. The Ecology Action Center is the central resource for environmental education, information, outreach, and technical assistance in McLean County, and we've been operating in that capacity for almost 50 years. We have programs in waste reduction and recycling, energy efficiency, renewable energy, clean air, and clean water. And the Yard Smart program is part of our clean water program. Yard Smart is designed to educate members of the community about ways that they can utilize environmentally sustainable lawn and gardening care practices. And the main purpose of this and why it is part of a clean water program is to help reduce our contributions to non-source point pollution. Non-point source pollution, excuse me. Non-point source pollution comes from sources that are harder to identify. So different types of runoff, both from our yards and the streets, and also agricultural runoff. Yard Smart is designed to provide tools to people to help them learn different ways that they can garden and practice gardening techniques that will reduce the need for synthetic chemicals and pesticides, which then reduces any risk of stormwater runoff pollution. So some of the Yard Smart techniques that we try to highlight and that you will see put in practice in the upcoming virtual tour are gardening with native plants. Those native plants require less resources, have longer root systems, retain water better, and are easier to care for, so require less need for synthetic additives. Rainwater catchment, so that helps reduce runoff by capturing the rainwater as it falls before it runs down your yard and into the storm drains. Using organic alternatives that don't rinse chemicals into the stormwater systems, and then other things to help keep your lawn healthy through proper mowing techniques and other types of common sense lawn care. So we are going to get our tour started here. I hope that you enjoy watching the different gardens that we have for you today. We'll be visiting several residents in Bloomington and Normal, as well as the Refuge Food Forest and the West Bloomington Gardens, and also visiting some residents that live in Secor. So we're really glad that you're here, and we hope you like what you see. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Lenore Clark, and this is 1404 Fell in Bloomington. I guess I've lived here 22 years now. I had grass in the front yard for a while, but it was very shady, never did very well, all lumpy. So little by little, I just started taking it all out. And then I started adding hostas. Mostly it's hostas. There are some other shade plants in here. Columbine, some native flowers, and some ginger, wild ginger. So this is my front yard. I really don't do anything to it except let the rain take care of it. I haven't even watered it this year at all. So 2 years ago I had my house resided, and when they did that they had to do a lead abatement study, and so they had to scrape everything away from 5 feet from the house out, and it kind of destroyed everything. I'm not sure what all they do when they do that. So this is all pretty new right here. Nothing really native in here, just plants that I liked. The lilies just finished and they were all really beautiful. It's pretty shady back here, so I don't have very much sun for vegetables, I have just a few tomatoes this year. This is kind of the sunniest spot. Let's see, a couple of native plants over here, wild petunia. I have little wrens that live in this house, and they are very anxious when I come out here and let me know it. And then yesterday I noticed I've got another birdhouse hanging on the cherry tree, and there's a little wren living in there. So they are very busy. They just go in and out, in and out. Oh, I let the Queen Anne's lace go, so it kind of reseeds itself all over the yard, as do the echinacea. So, yeah, lots of birdhouses, lots of birds. Got a couple of bird baths around, which the birds do like. The little wrens were even in there the other day. Robins will take a bath in the bird baths. And the crows, sometimes I put out old bread and stuff for the crows on this little thing, and they come and they get that, and then they go dip it in the water before they eat it. I don't know why, but they do. Gray-headed coneflower is another native plant, and blue indigo, more coneflowers, Culver's root over here. And then I've got honeysuckle, three or four different honeysuckles that the hummingbirds love. They come to that, usually real early in the morning. A lot of goldenrod will be blooming later, although everything seems a little earlier this year than usual. So that one's left over from last year. Okay, these two I just put up this year, and within, I would say, 2 days, I don't know how they find them. They just find them, and they've already almost filled up all the holes, which just amazes me. A lot of these, I know these are just weeds, but kind of like the way they look. I've had a lot of butterflies come through, monarchs and swallowtails and little admirals, red admirals. Then again, I never water back here, except this year I've watered a couple of things just to make sure they lived when it got so hot, but mostly I just let the rain do it and then use my rain barrels. So.
Welcome to the Food Forest. This is the town of Normal's 1 acre, fully organic plot of fruits and not so many vegetables, but nut trees, berry bushes, and all sorts of things to look at. It's a beautiful setting in One Normal Plaza, which is the old Illinois Soldiers and Sailors School. It's the former orphanage, and this 1 acre site is basically on the east side of the property. The public is welcome to visit anytime. It's open dawn to dusk. Everything here is free to be picked, and the weeds are free to be weeded. We chose to make this an organic property because we're committed to fewer chemicals in the environment on this property. So we follow all organic principles, and that means we are not putting any chemical fertilizers, no herbicides, no pesticides, no fungicides, none of those sides. It is side-free out here. And that means it's all perfectly healthy for you to come on out and just eat right off the plant. So here we are at the Blackberries. You can tell it's been weeded and we have mulched over it. And you know, one of the secrets to having a smart yard is not being so picky about everything. I mean, if you have a couple of weeds, it's okay. It's okay. You can just pull them out, and then when they come back, you can just do it again. It's kind of like a routine. But here we have, someone will come through and weed, and then my kids will come out and mulch. So you can tell this was done probably 2-3 weeks ago, but the plants are getting big enough now too that they're shading out a lot of the weeds. So the first couple years when we planted it, like back in 2015, it was a much bigger struggle because the plants were smaller, but now the plants are kind of taking care of their own maintenance in some ways. It's also really important with organic fruit management that you know how to prune. Because you do need to maintain, airflow and circulation. That cuts down on the funguses that can start developing, and so you have to prune well and just make sure things aren't all bunched up and hanging all over each other. So you can also just get a weed whacker and just go at it with a weed whacker. So yeah, this has been a really successful planting, and people get a ton of berries out of here. We have many different kinds of plants out here. By planting a diverse array of plants, we better ensure that there won't be disease problems and bug problems. If you plant all of the same things, of course, you risk everything being eaten by the same bug or everything succumbing to the same disease. So we have a diverse planting out here that we maintain primarily through volunteers weeding and mulching. And the town of Normal provides all the mowing services. So it's a really nice relationship. Lots of people come out here to help and to harvest, which is a really nice partnership. You know, because the food forest is loaded with bugs and it's not, it doesn't have any chemicals, it's a really safe and attractive home for lots of birds. We have a wren building a nest right now in one of the wren houses. We have hawks that come by. We have lots of birds that really hang out here quite often, and that's encouraging. That says that you're doing something right.
I'm Bill Davison. I'm originally from Northern Ohio, and I grew up with the garden, my grandparents' garden, my parents' garden, and so I've had a garden my whole life. I ended up working as a biologist for the Nature Conservancy here in Illinois. And in the process of that work, I met farmers that were growing organic vegetables, and that led me to running my own organic vegetable farm for 7 years. And now we live here in Normal and have a small organic garden that we're going to tour today. So I've adapted our organic farming practices down to a small scale, and we grow as much food as we can here in our yard in Normal. So some of the things you can see here in the garden are native plants along the fence here, which are used for beneficial insects. So there's bee balm, milkweed, rattlesnake master, a little row of parsley that's gone to seed, goldenrod, coneflowers. All of those plants attract different insects and help provide pest control and balance in the garden. And then these are all pepper plants you see here. And one of the things I do every year, especially in a year like this, is mulch with straw to reduce water use and try to get more productive plants. And then another strategy is the little birdhouse here, just fledged house wrens. So we have bird houses all over the garden because the birds are another important part of balance. So they eat a lot of insects, and so we attract as many birds as we can. So these are just trees that I started in pots. So these are a mix of Japanese walnut, apricots from Wisconsin, and chestnut trees. Some of these will go to the refuge food forest, but I also have them planted in the yard. But yeah, this is something that anyone could do to have trees for their yard. So there's lots of clover out there. There's also little patches of flowers like this parsley right here, which you can just let go to seed, and you see all the little insects buzzing around. So those are most likely beneficial. Those are the little guys that will help control your pest population. And then these are called potato onions. So these are perennial onions. These are like a shallot, but they can get bigger. So this is how I grow some of my own onions. So these will store for about 10 months. So it's an easy way to have a supply of onions. So this trellis is it's a good way to make efficient use of space. So if you don't have a lot of space, you can make a trellis like this. Right now there are pole beans and cucumbers on this trellis, and they'll end up going all the way to the top. So you can grow vining crops vertically and save a lot of space. These are yellow raspberries, which are really good. They'll be starting soon. Got some green beans forming here. You can see how many flowers there are. So each flower is going to turn into a bean. So we're going to have a nice harvest from these guys. And here's the gooseberry. I like to pick them about this color, so they go from green to purple, reddish purple. And when they're green, they're super tart. So like if you want to make a pie, they're good. But if you just want to eat them, when they're at this stage, they still have a little bit of that astringency, but they're moving towards sweetness. So you can pick gooseberries at your personal preference. So just this year, I've started to see, really see positive benefits to letting your property be a little more wild. So you can kind of see as you look across there, doesn't get mowed a lot, has a lot of diversity, a lot of structural diversity, woody plants, annual plants, intentional plantings of flowers to attract beneficials. And if you go through that process for a couple years, and then you take a little, you have some patience, and so if you see the pests on your plants, you don't want to try to eradicate all of them because you need that food source there for the wasps and the bees and the beneficials to feed on. So you have to allow the system to develop, but if you get to this point where we're at now, it's it's a lot better balance than having a clean, manicured garden where you try to fight to control everything.
Yeah.
Which is actually part of what appeals to me about all the perennials is, you know, when you garden with annuals, you usually somehow you have to apply nutrients, usually out of a bag. But with this system, so we have all these trees drawing nutrients up out of the soil, and you just prune branches and mulch with them and cycle the nutrients in that way.
Nice.
All right. Well, one of the first things, kind of the bonuses we get every year, every other year, is because I've worked for Henry Brockman at Henry's farm for 17 years, is that he always has extra sweet potato slips. So we did a whole plot here of sweet potatoes along with some Japanese burdock, which will, once we harvest it, we'll all take down to the WBRP for the whole community to just take, and whoever needs it, share with anybody in the neighborhood walking by. And part of the way we keep things organic is with things like this. This is a Japanese hand tool that Henry gets from Japan, and being organic and not using chemicals just takes a little extra work is all. And then over this way we have, the original plan was 16 trees, but of course I've gotten about 18 now and probably looking to put in a few more, so we're kind of squeezing things in. But this is a good example of how this works here. So this tree was planted a couple years ago, and it's a sun gold nectarine, and it's in memory of Hector Castillo. So anybody who comes by here that doesn't know what this tree is can look right down here at this brick and see exactly what it is and the person it's dedicated to. And that's nice for the family, but it's also just nice for strangers to see that people get recognized. And in the future, we hope to have little signs showing when the nectarines will be ripe, so when somebody comes up and they see a green one as opposed to an orange one, they'll know which one to pick. Let's see. Again, over here, that for me, this is a big learning process, even though I've been organic farming for so long. This Moore Park apricot in memory of Ken Leonard Jr. It's doing some pretty funky growing. I'm not 100% sure if it's growing correctly, but I'm researching and trying to learn everything I can about the plants, and this is what a lot of it takes here, is just hand pulling things and using the tool to kind of break things up. And dead weeds are also fertilizer, so every kind of plant matter we kill here, we leave here because it feeds the ground again. And thankfully, the house that was on this property was built so long ago that the natural soil was here, and they just built the house on top of it, unlike a lot of suburbs or outreaching communities where they actually scrape all of the topsoil off of your whole neighborhood, build your house, and then sell you topsoil to put back on top of it. This is good original black Illinois soil, some of the best in actually the entire world.
Another part of this garden is basically a bee garden. We have a lot of pollinators here.
My husband, John Eltrich, is a master gardener, master naturalist, and we are trying to grow vegetation that will support our beehives, but also monarch butterflies, bumblebees, anything else that helps pollinate. So we've also, we started some raised beds. That one over there is, we don't know. We just decided to let things grow and see what they turned out to be. So those are all volunteers over there. One of our gardening friends, Valerie Dumser, just said, they're weeds, pull them up. But, you know, bees don't read very well as far as I know, so I think sometimes if they flower, they'll eat that. We got strawberries over here, some tomatoes, and then in that raised bed over there, we've got borage and kale and tomato. And they're really starting to come in pretty heavily now.
And with the varieties of trees, I try to have 2 of everything, but not the same variety. So there's 2 apricots, but they're 2 different varieties. There's 2 pawpaws, but they're 2 different varieties. So diversity is the key to this. It's a diverse neighborhood, and with any kind of planting, the more diversity you have, the better you have of bug protection, disease protection, all that kind of stuff. But up front here, by the nice paved wall that was added a couple years ago, we have strawberries. So that's a nice early beginning of the season. Kids can walk along the sidewalk, pick fresh strawberries. In the future we'll have things like lingonberries, ground cherries, stuff like that that people aren't used to. So I'm also trying to have a lot of varieties that just are weird to people, they've never seen before, to educate them on how good everything can be.
Hi, I'm Don Schmidt, and this is my wife, Carol.
Hi.
And we've lived out here, we've owned the land for about 20 years, and we've lived here for about 16. And we started, when we bought it, it was basically a cornfield, and we started planting in prairie plants right as soon as we moved in. That was the first, as soon as we bought the property, that was the first thing we started to do. And over the last 20 years, we've got quite a few things that have come up, and they're very established. And we, the property's about 5 acres. We probably have about 3 acres in that we've planted in prairie. And you don't have to do too much of the prairie. I mean, I mow it usually once a year. I mow it in the fall, maybe in early November. I mow it down to short, and then it'll come back up. And so in the springtime it was flat, and now it's about 2.5 feet tall probably, and it will get taller as the summer goes along. There's that's the real maintenance thing I do. I do a little weeding. I pull out a few things I don't like giant ragweed and things like that. I pull those out. And after you do that a few times, then you don't get them too often anymore, and so it all sort of takes care of itself more or less, which is good. It's very drought tolerant. The water is the thing I'm always worried about out here, because I can't water anything, and so these plants just take care of themselves, and they seem happy, and that's good. Early on, when it first starts growing, it doesn't look like this for right away. At first it comes up lots of weeds, lots of other stuff. You got to work at it hard to try to get it like this. It's not. You just don't let it go and say, "Oh, it'll come back all by itself." I mean, I'd like to think it would do that, but it doesn't do that. You certainly invest some time in it to get it started.
A few years ago, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I said to Don, "We don't have enough rattlesnake master. We need rattlesnake master." Mm-hmm. So he said, "Okay." And so now
you've got lots.
Yeah, mostly it was just getting a few plants and collecting seeds, and they like it, so they came up pretty well. The prairie grass is in here. As Don said, we started out planting just little blue stem, but for some reason or other, there is Indian grass and
big blue
stem that has moved in from, maybe the seed was a little contaminated, or maybe it's blown in from somewhere, but we have a lot of it. And if you can see where Don has not mowed, you can still see some stems tall stems over there that that's probably Indian grass over there. And you can see a few stems of big blue stem too that are starting to show some flowers.
These are our tomatoes and these are eggplants, and the tomatoes they're getting to be a nice size. Over here in the vegetable garden, I always use straw as a mulch. I just put the straw on. That really keeps the soil much cooler. Really reduces the water use of the plants. It really helps out a lot. You don't have to water as much. Have to water occasionally, but it rained a little bit last night, so that was good. And the straw is down, and so that was good. So that's how it goes. But so this is a pretty big vegetable garden, and we get enough stuff for us and more. But
what do you grow usually?
Tomatoes and eggplants and peppers and potatoes. I picked about 20 pounds of potatoes yesterday. Peas and beans and beets and what else? And onions and leeks, garlic. So assortment of stuff, you know, kohlrabi, whatever, vegetables, kale. Do you want any more kale, Carol?
No.
No more kale. We've had a bounty in kale. Kale is
Berries too?
berries. There's raspberries. But it's a nice garden. It's not too big for me to manage, I don't think, but I don't want it any bigger. I'm sort of maxed out on how much room I have here now. I water a little bit in the vegetable garden. I'll water the vegetables occasionally. Like I watered some last week when it was so dry, but I try not to water more than I have to. And as I say, the straw really helps reduce the need for water. The straw comes from a farmer this came from Western Illinois. They actually told me. I got it at A.B. Hatchery, and they told me they got it from a guy in Western Illinois. But they usually get it from a guy in McLean County, but he was out of straw, so they had to buy another load from somewhere else. But the straw works. It works well. It's nice and loose. The water penetrates into it readily. These are black gums, Tupelo. And they're really nice trees. They've really developed nicely. And if you like fall color, they are the very best for fall color. They get really nice red color in the fall. I particularly like them. This is a pawpaw, and this is an Ohio buckeye. There's some oaks. Those are oaks that we grew them from seeds. Those oaks right there, we planted those as seeds. And when you plant from a seed, you eventually get a tree. Carol collected the seed.
Yeah.
When
What I did was I was out walking one day in our old neighborhood where you live, and I saw this great big oak tree, and I liked it, so I went around and I picked up the acorns, and Don grew them. Not in the ground, he had them in pots.
Sure.
And then he transferred them.
Well, that was lovely. I hope that you all enjoyed the tour portion of our program this evening. Coming up next, we have a presentation from David Lamb and Jeff Hindman from the City of Bloomington. They took some time to talk to us about both some of the city's mowing and lawn care practices, and then also to provide some tips about proper mower maintenance so that we can all be more efficient mowers. So I hope that you enjoy that. It's coming up now.
This is David Lamb, City of Bloomington Parks, Recreation, Culture Arts Department. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Parks. I've got Jeff Hindman here with me. He's the city's lead horticulturist. We're more than happy to be helping with the Ecology Action Center on their Yard Smart program. I wanted to talk about some mowing and cultural practices today that we employ here at the City of Bloomington in our Parks Department, that I think some of these may help you out in your yards or the other areas that you may maintain. Here at the Parks Department, we maintain about 1,200 acres a week of turf grass. We maintain all the turf grass in the City of Bloomington on public property. That includes parks, right-of-ways, creeks, lakes, ditches, all that kind of stuff. We try to mow on a 7-day rotation, and we mow between 3.5 inches and 4 inches in height. The predominant species around this area is bluegrass, Kentucky bluegrass, and that species responds to that type of mowing height. We have seen that this reduces weed pressure and helps the turf flourish. Okay, the weeds usually grow at 2 inches or so, and if you can keep the grass growing taller than the weeds, they can't get the sunlight for them to germinate and to take over. This is a cultural practice that we use to avoid having to use chemicals and fertilizer often in the park system. Well, another thing that we do is we maintain our equipment very well. We always clean our blades, our decks, our mowers. We do all the maintenance on it. Jeff's going to talk to you specifically about that and how that could work into your yard on your smaller machine. But we do that all the time. We follow all the instructions on the machines. We change the oils, the fluids, etc. to make sure we are putting the best machine on the turf that we can. We maintain multiple conservation areas across the city of Bloomington. We call these conservation areas because we only mow them once a year. We conserve fuel, we conserve manpower, we hold the nutrients from the road into the turf. We don't let that get into the groundwater or the stormwater. We're creating cleaner stormwater by doing that. We conserve city funds, fuel, by only mowing these areas once a year. We always try to make a buffer next to water areas to keep nutrients and runoff from getting into the water. Okay? One of the things that we do is we irrigate very minimally on our athletic fields and our golf courses. There's an expectation by the people that use those that those areas are soft, lush, green. That's what they're paying for by using those, and we provide that. We irrigate about 1 inch of water a week, and we start in mid-May. As you'll notice this time of year, most all of our parks are going dormant. That is a very common thing for turf grass to do this time of year, July, August, for it to go dormant. It is a cool season turf grass in this area. Its main growing seasons are in the spring and the fall. What I'm saying is your yard is not dead, okay, with it being brown. It is dormant. There is 2 dormant seasons for turf grass in Illinois, middle of the summer and the winter. If you do not want your turf to go into dormancy over the winter, there's nothing you can do. It's going to go into dormancy over the winter. If you do not want it to go dormant in the summer, you can start your watering program the middle of May with about 1 inch a week before it shows any signs of going brown. Okay? Another thing I notice around town and pretty frequently is I see people mowing on Saturdays and Sundays because that's the day to mow. Okay, I haven't mowed my yard personally in 2.5 weeks. I'm sure Jeff hasn't mowed his either. If the turf grass does not need to be mowed, the worst thing you can do is to stress it out even more by putting a machine, weight, blades, and stuff like that on it. If it's brown, let it rest, okay? All you're going to do is help it respond better in the fall, okay? We work on in the fall, we aerate all of our turf. That is a cultural practice that is non-invasive, is an integrated pest management practice that does not require chemicals, and we do that to all our turf to encourage the turf grass and to discourage the weeds. Another thing I think that will help most homeowners is thinking about a seeding window going into this fall. I've seen people seeding in October, November, okay? The best time to seed turf grass in Illinois is between August 15th and September 15th. Okay, you want the turf grass to get down, the seed to get down, sowed into the soil and watered. After September 15th, you want to get at least 3 mowings out of that grass before it goes dormant for the winter. Okay, so you want this to be lush and established before winter. If it's just sprouting up before winter, it's going to get killed by the first freeze. Those are a lot of the things that we do to help our turf, to help conserve the city's funds, and to help minimize the time that we have the machines on the turf here in the parks. One of the things we also do here at the city is we try to mulch all of our plant beds and tree rings within the parks. That provides good moisture retention for the plants, keeps the weeds and grass out of the plant beds and the mulch rings, and provides a definite edge for the differentiation between turf and plants. It's an important part of our cultural practices as well. It's good for the plants, it's good for the turf. We use recycled wood product here that we make our mulch here at our facility ourselves. I'd like to turn it over to Jeff, and he's going to talk about some mower maintenance and some other things that him and his people do to maintain the equipment in the City of Bloomington's park system.
Hi, I am Jeff Hindman here with the Bloomington Parks Department. We are at our maintenance facility, and we're here happy to help out the Ecology Action Center with their Yard Smart program and I just wanted to go through some simple tips on mower maintenance and care. Okay, so each time you mow, you're going to want to make sure that you fill your mower with fuel. The gas cap off, you can see right in here where you would add the gas to it. Once you're full there, make sure you put the cap back on, it's secured, and then you'll want to check your oil. Pull this out, look at the dipstick, you can see where the oil level is at, and you want it between the high and low mark. And if you look there, you can see that little shaded area with the two arrows being your high and low mark. If it is low, you want to add oil before you mow. Okay, in addition to your fuel and oil, you want to check your air filter on a regular basis. This is just a straight head screwdriver. Loosen this up, we'll take this cover off, and there's your filter. As you can tell, this filter is dirty and needs to be cleaned. In order to clean this, a lot of times you can simply tap it and that will get most of it out of there. You can take a blower and blow that out, and in addition to on a routine basis of cleaning this on an annual basis, you want to replace this filter. I would typically replace it every spring. Obviously a dirty filter makes the mower struggle and work harder than it should. Clean filter, the mower will run much better. Okay, on an annual basis, you want to replace your spark plug. Just take this boot, pull it off. As you can see on the inside, the little coil around there is what actually wraps around the spark plug. Take that off, take a wrench, pull this out, replace this with the same spark plug that you have, and put it back on once you're done, and you're ready to roll. Okay, so when you want to sharpen your blade, first thing you want to do is pull your spark plug off so you don't have any worry of that blade spinning on you. Lean it back. Underneath side is your blade. You've got this bolt here which holds the blade in place. I would suggest taking a 2x4, wedging it so that you have something to brace this when you undo your bolt. And sharpening this, you can pull this off, sharpen it with a grinder, a file, and if you don't feel that you're capable of doing it, you can take it to a local lawnmower service location and they can sharpen it for you. Once you're done, just make sure that your cutting side is down. Put it all in place, attach it again, secure, and then when you're done, don't forget, the mower won't run if you don't put the spark plug back in place. Okay, like Dave mentioned, we typically want to mow between 3 and 4 inches in height. So in order to adjust your height, you'll have a tab on each wheel. Typically, some mowers are different, but this is pretty standard. In order to adjust that height, you can pull that tab out. If you let it go down, it'll lock in the next place, which lowered that a 1/2 inch. These are all 1/2 inch increments. Simply pull it out, slide it back in, and you are secured at that correct height. I think throughout the growing season, you're going to mow at 3.5 inches roughly. When you get into the fall season, it's fine to drop the mower down at a 1/2 inch or so, put your bagger on the mower, slide this into from recycle to bagging. The bagger actually goes on the back end here. Then once you're done, you will just take this, slide it back into the recycle mode, and you will be mulching the grass. We also suggest that when you cut your grass, you cut it when it needs it, not necessarily every weekend. In the spring, you're going to need to cut your grass more often. A general rule of thumb is you never want to cut off more than 1/3 of your height at a time.
We're very grateful to the City of Bloomington for providing that information for us. And Jeff, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to everyone watching. And if there's anything else you'd like to add about the work that you do for the city, we'd be happy to know more about what you do.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I am Jeff Hindman. I'm a horticulturist at the City of Bloomington. I'm the senior horticulturist. I've been there coming on 20 years, and I am currently responsible for the parks in the northern east part of the city.
Thank you so much. We also have joining us this evening, Sherrie Snyder with the Illinois Prairie Wild Ones. Sherrie, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a bit about what Illinois Prairie Wild Ones does?
Sure. Sherrie Snyder. About 10 years ago, we, several of us got together and started a chapter called the Illinois Prairie Wild Ones. It's a chapter of the national organization, which has chapters across the country. And I'll get into a little bit more of what our chapter does when it's my turn.
Okay, and then we also have Krista Kirkham with us with the Nature Conservancy. Krista, thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I'm Krista, and I am an aquatic ecologist for the Nature Conservancy. I've been working here in McLean County, eastern McLean County, for 13 years now, actually working on the agriculture side of things, conventional agriculture. So working with farmers and landowners, producers to implement best management practices on their property and then monitoring those effectiveness. So happy to be here.
Great, thank you so much. So we already got a bit of an intro about what Jeff does with the mower video there. So we got some helpful tips from him. Sherrie, would you like to go into more detail about Illinois Prairie Wild Ones' work with native plants?
Sure. As I mentioned, and almost 10 years ago in December, we will be celebrating our 10-year anniversary. A group of us got together and decided to start a chapter here in Central Illinois. I have been on the board since the beginning, and I have been the plant sale chair for 9 years. We did not have a plant sale the first year. Well, as you can see here, one of the great benefits of native plants is that they're beautiful. And one of the purposes, or the main purpose of the national chapter of Wild Ones, is to encourage people to plant more native plants in their yard. The plants that you saw there were all from my yard. These are just a few of the native plants that I have. I have over 100 different species of native plants in my yard. Some of the prior presenters have talked about some of the benefits of native plants, but just to reiterate here, they are beautiful. They support our pollinators, which, as you know, is so important now as the pollinators are in peril from lack of environment to support them, from pesticides. Our native plants are also adapted to our local climate. As several of our presenters mentioned, if you put them in the right place, you don't have to water them. Most of our native plants are perennials, which means they'll come back year after year. I don't know how many times you may have planted plants that were not natives and they don't make it through our winters. Well, our native plants are adapted to our winters and they'll come back next year. There are native plants for every situation. If you've got a dry, shady place, there are native plants that grow in dry, shady places in Illinois. If you've got, a wet, sunny place, there are plants that will grow there too. So you can find native plants in Central Illinois that will fit any situation that you have in your yard. They bloom throughout the growing season. So being perennials, they may have a short bloom time, but there is something in bloom at all times. And that's how I've set my garden up, is to have something in bloom at all times for the different pollinators and their different needs. The plants provide food. And one of the things, that back to the pollinators is if you don't have food for the larva plant or the larva, you're not going to have the adults. So you need food for the larva as well as the adults. They provide shelter, nesting materials for wildlife. And no offense, folks from Bloomington, but the more native plants you plant, the less mowing you need to do. As I mentioned, the national organization has chapters across the country. Our local chapter offers monthly programs, which have been a little bit different this year, in that we have been Zooming our meetings, and our presenters have been very helpful in cooperating and providing Zoom meetings. We have a native plant sale every year, and our members get a discount at that sale. Our members also provide mentoring for other members who may just be getting started or have questions about their yard. We can do yard visits. We have a Facebook page that is open to anyone, and our Facebook administrator does a wonderful job of collecting information all about native plants and the environment. And we also have a Facebook group just for members where we do a lot of sharing. People share what's growing in their garden at that time. If they've got extra plants, they'll share that, come pick up these extra plants. One of the things I'm really excited about is this year we have started a new project called Pollinator Pathway. If you've had a chance to read any Doug Ptolemy, and certainly if you've had a chance to read his most recent book, Nature's Best Hope, he talks about creating Homegrown National Park. He's saying that if everybody in the United States were to devote part of their yard to native plants, we would be able to create a national park that's larger than the other national parks put together. So what we're trying to do is our own little mini national park in central Illinois. So our goal is to create corridors of these native plantings. And as you can see from the map here, we've already started. If you are interested in joining, you do not have to be a Wild Ones member. All you have to do is pledge not to use insecticides in your yard and have at least one native plant in your yard. And we're hoping once you get started with one that you'll go from there. And then you can fill out an application on our page there that you can see. And then you'll get a little mark on our map. This goes beyond Bloomington Normal. It includes several counties. All the information is on our website, so you can check out our website. But our goal is to try to connect all these yellow dots into one big yellow line so that our pollinators have a way to get from one area to the next, that our poor pollinators don't find milkweed in one yard and then have to travel to the other side of Bloomington to find the next milkweed. That's just not going to work for them. So we're trying to build corridors and pathways that connect throughout central Illinois. For more information about native plants, I mentioned Nature's Best Hope by Doug Ptolemy. This is his most recent book where he can convince you that you need to add native plants to your yard. Another excellent source is Alan Branhagen, Native Plants of the Midwest. He goes through 500 different species of plants and tells you everything you need to know about them, their landscape value, how to grow them, and where they grow best, and all sorts of information. Both the Audubon Society and the National Wildlife Federation, if you're wondering, what plants do I put in my yard, which ones grow here in central Illinois, you can go to either of those sites, put in your zip code, and it'll give you a list of native plants that will grow in central Illinois. The Illinois Wildflowers.info there at the end is, or the last one listed there. Once you find out what native plants grow in your area, you can go there and you can see pictures of the native plants. You can find out what insects like them. You can find out where they grow, if it's sun, shade, wet, dry, whatever. If you want more information about Wild Ones, and I hope you do, the national website is wildones.org. We have our own website for our local chapter at illinoisprairie.wildones.org. And as I mentioned, we have a public Facebook page open to anyone. There's tons of great information out there, lots of great resources and pictures that our administrator puts out there. And if you have any questions, you can email us at illinoisprairie.wo@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherrie. I really love the Pollinator Pathway project or corridor project. I'll have to get my house registered. And just to plug EAC related things, if someone registers themselves on the pollinator corridor through Wild Ones, you could also self-register yourself to be a Yard Smart designated space as well, because it's a self-designation that just says that you're trying to reduce your use of chemicals and pesticides and that you've got a lot of native plants and room for wildlife in your yard. So thank you so much. And I have seen some questions coming in. I just want to say to everyone that's watching, we are tracking your questions, and there'll be time at the end where we'll do our best to get to everyone's queries so we can get good answers for you. Krista, I will turn it over to you to share some more information about the work you're doing with the Nature Conservancy.
Sure, thank you, Larissa. And so what I'm going to talk about right now is quite a bit different than the focus of the Yard Smart. However, the concepts of trying to reduce nutrients coming into our waterways, reducing erosion is exactly the theme of the work that I do. It's just in a different landscape, which is conventional agriculture, and it's at much larger scale, so multiple acres versus a yard. And so myself and my team, what we do, we work we're trying to do this work at several scales. So we have a project in a small watershed scale just south of Colfax, Illinois. We have a project within the Money Creek watershed, and then we also have a project on a farm in Lexington, Illinois. And the overall themes in all of these is basically what conservation practices can be installed that's cost effective, but also we see reductions in nitrogen and phosphorus, which are the two nutrients of concern in our current water systems. And so Michael's pulled up this first slide here. And one of the ways that we've been dealing with this or working with producers is to install constructed wetlands. And here's a picture of probably our most engineered one, as you can tell. It's definitely got a shape to it. It's about 400 feet away from Money Creek as well. And in this area, we try to split up our conservation practices based on surface flow and what would actually tackle runoff from tile drainage. And if you're not familiar with that, most of this part of Illinois is tile drained, and so it's just a way that producers can get water that would be standing in their fields off their landscape. And so it's these plastic pipes essentially that's got perforations on the top of it, and it's built in this network underground, and so groundwater is then shunted to the creek. It's made it very efficient for farming, but it's really changed how water moves on our landscape. And so that comes with a lot of extra erosion and extra nutrients coming in. So these wetlands are actually built to intercept that tile drainage before it goes into a creek. So on the side closest to the screen here, there's actually a tile inletting over there where that little box is, and then it will eventually exit out on the far end there. And you'll notice this sort of S-shaped pattern, and that's on purpose. So the longer that we can allow water to sit and interact with the sediments there, what's going to happen is called denitrification. So basically bacteria are working to break down the nitrate molecule, which is the nutrient of concern there. And it'll break it down eventually to just nitrogen gas, and then it's released to the atmosphere. And that's what we're looking for here. So this one is in the McLean County watershed. I am the principal technician out here, so I come out and sample this every week. And our instrumentation is set so that we can collect samples based on just how many liters go through a flow, but also the rate of rise, so if we have a storm event. Next slide, Michael, please. Here's another example of the wetland, and I should have said before that all these wetlands were we partnered with this McLean County Soil and Water District a lot with this, and they're all under the Conservation Reserve Program, specifically Conservation Practice 39. So these farmers or landowners are getting payments for setting land aside for this conservation payment. So here's another example of a wetland that was installed, and that's my team over there on the left. We're actually installing our monitoring equipment because the idea was that we really want to see how effective that these are at reducing nutrients. And the good news that I can tell you is that we've been monitoring different ones from anywhere from 4 years all the way up to 12 years, and wetlands do a great job at reducing nutrients. We can see anywhere from like 13 to 40% reduction in nitrate and a very high reduction of phosphorus, which has been kind of surprising. But this wetland here runs very, very well. We're seeing almost a 50% reduction in nitrate here. So we're excited for that. Wetlands, unfortunately, are expensive to install. So we really work hard to try to offset some of those costs that are put in at the beginning. So this is an example of what we call an edge of field practice. Michael, if you go to the next slide. Another practice that we heavily promote is called an infield practice. This is something that could be done in the crop field itself. And this one is called cover crops. This is really gaining a lot of energy within the agricultural sector. And the main idea with cover crop is something that you're going to plant after your cash crop, whether it's soybeans, wheat, corn, cotton, and it's meant to grow through the fall, go dormant in the winter and then would grow back in the spring. Some people that are new to this project will put in certain species that will only grow in the fall, and then they'll winter kill. But the idea is to keep nutrients in the ground, perhaps even add nutrients to the ground, and they're very good at reducing erosion and can offer a lot of benefits for your cash crop that's coming in. So this is a picture from our project in Lexington. What we see here is cereal rye, and this is probably the toughest cover crop out there. It certainly can overwinter and it comes back very strongly. This picture was taken around March or so, and you can see how well the seeds did that year. And this farm is actually aerial seeded. So we'll have a plane come in and it'll seed whenever the corn or soybeans are kind of going to their dormant end, usually in mid to late September. And then you hope for some rains, and this is what you hope to get. Next slide, Michael. And here's another example. Sorry for the fuzzy picture, but this is another somewhat common one. It's called annual ryegrass. And this one is used not as much as cereal rye, but it's promoted a little bit more to use if you're going into a corn crop, because there can be some issues with cereal rye and corn. But this is just another example of what can be done for a producer to help reduce erosion, but also really help the amount of nutrients that's staying on that farm field. So that's a lot of the work that I do. And then of course the monitoring along with that to see what works. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now we are going to open the floor to questions. So we've been tracking questions that have already come in, but I also want to remind folks that they can enter questions into the chat in Zoom or on Facebook Live, and we're doing our best to get to everyone. We are prioritizing Zoom questions first, but only because we'll be able to answer Facebook Live questions retroactively if we need to. With that being said, we have a question from Chris Williams, and she wanted to know, what do bees and other insects that use insect houses, like the ones that we saw in Lenore Clark's yard, what do they use to fill the holes in insect houses? Does anybody, I can answer the question if no one else can, but if someone else wants to take it, I'm happy to give the floor.
Here's Larissa.
Okay, so typically mason bees use those insect houses a lot. They're actually sealing their cocoons in the holes there using mud. So in order for mason bee houses to be effective, you do need to have moisture on your property in order for them to be able to create mud and fill the holes after they put their cocoons in there, or after they use them for cocoons. Let's see, this is another quick question I can answer. Diane Buck wanted to know if that garden on the west side was Matt Erickson's home garden. No, the gardens that we saw in West Bloomington are empty plots that were purchased up by residents in the area and then converted into garden space. So Matt Erickson works in one section that's called Mom's Orchard, and then Karen Schmidt and her husband do a lot of work both there and in the garden just across Howard Street, where her beehives and stuff are. And so those gardens are on West Washington Street and Howard, so before you get to Morris Avenue there on West Washington. I think this is a question for Sherrie. Mark Taylor was asking if there is an available chart that categorizes native pollinators, native plants in central Illinois by bloom time, shade, sun, just to kind of give people a tool that they could use to have plants that, you know, are flowering over the whole growing season like you talked about, and what plants work best in which areas.
Yeah, I would start with that IllinoisWildflowers.info. It's broken out into wetland plants, prairie plants, woodland plants, so you can kind of get an idea from that. It also breaks it out with trees and shrubs. You can go to our local chapter's website. We have lots of resources out there. NRCS has some really nice charts they've put together for that. So you can go to their website. And I'm not sure about the Audubon and the National Wildlife Federation, how their sites are set up. You know, the U of I Extension also has a really nice native plant section, and I'm pretty sure that you can put in your parameters, you know, whether you want it wet or dry, but I definitely check out that U of I.
Okay, thank you so much. Greg Coos said that the corridor of native plants is a splendid idea, and that alleyways in central Bloomington are city-owned, and that perhaps a partnership of alley planting could help. So that was an idea that he offered up. But then he also asked a question, and I think maybe this is a good question for Jeff. He said that he was looking for recommendations for more diverse lawn culture. He currently is cultivating bluegrass, clover, and violets, and was thinking of adding chicory for like during the hot portion of the summer, and is wondering if there are any other recommendations for things they could look at.
Probably the best would be a turf type tall fescue, which, the tall fescue used to be a very thick bladed grass that everybody hated to see, but with the new blended varieties, it is much more heat and drought tolerant. So that would be my best suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
Larissa?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd also like to mention that, again, we're just getting started with this pollinator pathways, but we are currently working with the town of Bloomington and I believe Normal, and trying to identify some spots there like Miller Park Zoo, and putting them on the chart so that they will be a part of our pollinator pathway as well.
Okay, thank you. Kathy Packard wanted to know what the little orange, black, and white caterpillars were that we saw in the intro of the event. And I'm going to not pronounce this correctly, but it's Ailanthus webworm moth, I think, or Ailanthus maybe. Michael typed the answer in for me, so if I do not know the answer to that question. Let's see, Krista. How much are prairie strip plantings being tried in Illinois? Iowa has a wonderful plan in progress, and Minnesota has a water easeway mandate requiring green permanent plantings along banks of streams. Do you know if there are any projects in the works for Illinois farmlands to make these changes?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Thank you. And yes, so Prairie Strips is quite new to Illinois. And so this will be, I actually just saw a webinar come out about it 2 weeks ago. And so this is kind of a nice alternative. What this program would do would pay farmers to put in strips of prairie between their corn or soybeans versus taking out really large acreages, but you could still have long stretches, which would be really ideal. So it's kind of like a win-win for being able to get some habitat in without taking a tremendous amount of land out of production. And so I'm excited to learn more about it myself. I just personally heard about it, but you're absolutely right. This is much more common in Iowa, and Minnesota's had their buffer initiative that was referenced earlier for several years now. So unfortunately, Illinois tends to be a little behind the curve when it comes to picking up some of our conservation practices, but that we're getting better. I think there's a lot more influence from other groups trying to really work together to push things forward in that regard. But we're coming around with cover crops as well. But thank you, that's a good question.
Thank you. Jeff, someone was asking what height is commonly recommended for turf in residential lawns?
Again, I think that's more the 3.5 to 4 inch height throughout the growing season. And the crucial thing is to not mow when you don't need to mow. I know in the parks, the last month, I think we mowed 1 week out of that whole month. I mean, it just didn't need it, and you just need to stay off of it and let it rest and try to avoid doing damage.
And so what happens, what are some of the drawbacks if people mow like under that, if they're mowing shorter than that 3.5 to 4 inches? I mean, why is the 3.5 to 4 inch the recommended height?
The biggest thing, by cutting shorter, you are going to shorten your root growth. And so same thing with watering. If you water, less frequently, and if you water frequently, you're going to train your grass that the water is right there and it doesn't need to develop a root system. Same thing with cutting it short. I know people, some people think it looks great because it's super short, but it's just not healthy for it. Same thing with it being taller. You have the weed suppression. You can avoid using the chemical if you let it shade out the weeds.
Okay, thank you very much. Sherrie, Karen Harlan says that the Prairie Wild Ones chapter seems to be for members only. I'm assuming maybe they're asking about the Facebook page, because then the follow-up question is there a page open for the public to join?
Okay, we have two Facebook pages. One that is Wild Ones, Illinois Prairie Chapter. That's open to anyone. And you have to be a member to join our Facebook group.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. And I'm assuming probably links to the Facebook pages are like on the Illinois Prairie Wild Ones website too. So if they found the website, they might find a link to the social media there.
I don't know. Okay. Maybe Michael can throw up that slide, I don't know, real quickly, that has the...
Oh, sure. Let's see. Janet Rasmussen said, yes, the link is there.
Okay. Janet's our webmaster. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Janet. Let's see, I think this is a question both maybe for Sherrie, but also Jeff with his experience in horticulture. Someone asked on Facebook while we were watching the garden tour portion, someone asked what people do with vegetation in their gardens after plants die back in the fall. So I think I'll let Jeff go first with just maybe some kind of best practices for what some common things are for people to do with their plants once they're done doing their thing, essentially.
The two things that come to mind there is just tilling it in or composting it.
Okay. And Sherrie, I know there's some specific things people can do, particularly if they have like native prairie plants. So I know, for example, at my house, I just kind of let everything hang out until the next spring, and then I kind of make room for the new green stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You saw the mason bees or the bee houses with the little holes that the bees like to get into. Hundreds of years ago, they didn't have these little holes to get into that we were providing for them, but what they did was they overwinter in the stems of hollow plants, or plants that have hollow stems. So what we recommend is that you leave the stems in place, like Larissa does over the winter. You can cut them back to about 12 inches high if you want, if you want to clean it up a little bit. But what I've heard is that leave those in place until you have 11 consecutive days of 50-degree or above weather. And by then, hopefully the little bees have hatched and left, and then you can compost. Another option, if you don't want to leave them sitting that long, is I've heard, I haven't tried yet, but you can take, when you cut everything down, leave it standing and put it like inside a tomato cage so that everything's still standing. And if there's still bee larvae in there, they can hatch on their own time, and then you can compost stuff later on. So those are a couple options.
That's interesting, thank you. Jeff, there's a question here that says, does the City of Bloomington do any prescribed burns? And if so, what are the benefits of that?
Yes, we definitely do prescribed burns. I would say probably about 8 to 9 different locations. But probably the one that most people see is Tipton Park. When we burn that, since that's essential. And talking about wildflower strips, I know when that was developed, there used to be the easement between the houses. There was a bunch of wildflower strips that were put in place. I don't know that there's a whole lot of them left, but there still are some. But obviously it's designed to encourage native plant growth and discourage the weeds.
Thank you. Krista, a question for you here. How does, since, and you mentioned when you started your portion that what you were going to be talking about was a little bit different than what we'd kind of been going over with the yard tour and what everyone else was talking about. But so the question was, how does yard care and agricultural practices, how do they relate to water quality? And are there similarities in strategies that farmers use that homeowners could also use to reduce water pollution?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks. Yeah, I think the common concept to think about is that everybody has to do their part in some way to keep, if you're adding anything to your soil, to keep it there, make sure it's there for the plant that needs it, things like that. And just the scale is very different. I did learn a long time ago that, of course, farmers in this area, they use pounds and pounds and pounds of fertilizers or herbicides, things like that. But when you compare by foot or inch by inch, it's actually homeowners that use quite a bit more. So really, if there's ways that people can even just cut back on what they're using, that'd be a big step in town, because, you know, when we have big rains and we have, you know, even last week we had that tremendously heavy rain, you know, we're going to have some pretty severe runoff. So I think people in town or even out in their ag lands, anything you can do to help keep your nutrients where they are is going to be helpful. So whether, you know, I've seen people use cover crops now in their gardens and yards, even if it's just, you know, 10 by 12 feet, that's great. And you'll see all the insects that come hang out there too. So the scale is different, but the theme is the same.
Okay, thank you so much. And there's looks like one more question I have for Krista, and that is, have you observed migratory water birds using your wetland created areas?
Yes, that's been exciting. So I'm not a very good birder, but I have learned a few along the way. Probably my favorite, and they actually do come every year, which is very exciting. They're Sora rails that have come to these constructed wetlands, and they actually nest there now. But we certainly get all kinds of little ducks and lots of shorebirds that I don't always know what they are, but it's been kind of fun to see them walking around on the edges. And that's been very rewarding to see something that just comes back to life so quickly, whether it's the aquatic plants that come up that were not seeded, that was just in the seed bed. But we've had all kinds of other particularly migratory birds that come in the spring really take advantage of it. So yes, they definitely have come back, which is fantastic.
Thank you so much. I think that is all we have for questions. Again, I want to extend thanks to all of you, Krista, Sherrie, and Jeff. Thank you so much for giving us some of your evening and sharing all of your insights with us. It's been, I've learned some things, and I hope that everyone that's joined us virtually on Zoom and Facebook has too. I want to thank everyone that has attended for joining us. Yard Smart is one of my favorite annual activities, and it was a little bit sad that we didn't get to do the garden walk in person, but I think that this was a really great alternative, and I'm so thankful for everyone for joining. For more tips about how to be Yard Smart, you can look at our yardsmart.org page on the Ecology Action Center's website. We're also usually, we would have some kind of voluntary donations if we were doing the Yard Smart in person. We know that times are hard for people, but if anyone is interested in making a small contribution to the Ecology Action Center, you can do that on our webpage as well. And we do have some closing credits and a little extra snippet of fun from some of the gardens, so don't sign off just yet. But we're really thankful that you all were here, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you so much.
And you're going to do some editing, or is this supposed to be like?
We can cut, we can edit.
Like Sarah said, Mom, you keep buying more plants.
I go through a lot of bird seed. I use a lot of bird seed. I could have worse habits.
No herbicides, no pesticides, no fungicides, none of those sides. It is side-free out here.
This will be relevant to at least one person in your group.
Your dad and like Bill cannot watch this video. I mean, I'm 100% sure I'm saying inaccurate things right now.
Whatever, vegetables, kale. Do you want any more kale, Carol? No more kale.
If we go back to the kale, I can talk about good bugs and bad bugs.
Let's do it.
In the spring, so.
It looks really nice. I mean, it's,
oh, chipmunk.
Mice, chipmunks, little bastards.
I've put them in the witness protection program where I catch them and move them somewhere else.
I know these are just weeds, but kind of like the way they look.
Oh, don't show anybody this weed.
Yeah. Just a second, I've forgotten what it is.
Yes.
So you have to let it do this because this is the stage. I'm choking on a gooseberry.
There he goes, right over your head. He's coming. I thought he was going to land.
Okay, that's all I have to say about that.